welcome everyone to this Seven Foundation online event. We're really pleased to have Michael Shaw, who's the publisher of Reading the Pictures, with us today to talk about news imagery in the first period of the Trump administration. We've spoken with Michael previously, and I was a bit shocked when I looked back to find out. I thought this was like last year or the year before, but Michael, it's been nearly 3 years since we talked about the visual framing of social issues. But I'm glad we're back again to do this. For those who don't know so much about Reading the Pictures, tell us a little bit about the mission, the work you do, and where they can find Reading the Pictures.
Well, we've been in existence since also talking about like dates and scariness, I guess, but we've been doing this since 2004, and we've been really a go-to resource for news consumers, media professionals, visual academics, and also journalists, visual journalists, in the analysis of politics and culture through the lens of news photography. And we've worked with visual scholars and professionals to analyze, understand the framing, context, bias, themes, trends in news photographs, and also do a certain amount of also visual forensics. And it's just been incredible to me, and becomes more incredible every day, that given the saturation of images in our culture, that there really are so few people doing systematic and more public deconstruction, and understanding of visuals and visual framing. And hopefully, like this presentation today will be, a living example of that.
Yeah.
So you can find us. We actually moved to Substack about a year ago now, and so you can find us there under my name and also Reading the Pictures. And I hope people will subscribe. We've kept it free, and we're a nonprofit, so we've been able to do that. You can also find us. We concentrated most of our social media on Blue Sky,
Right.
but we're also, to an extent, also still on Instagram Threads. We left our 20,000 Twitter followers behind something like 2 years ago. So
yes, hope they migrated as well.
but readingthepictures.media is our new URL and base at Substack, and hope people will follow us there.
Yeah. Sort of as a general principle, do you see news images as kind of a reflection of the culture, as a driver of the culture? I mean, how do you understand kind of the purpose and role of news images?
I think both. What's been very interesting, starting probably from the Obama administration, when in tandem with the rise of the blogosphere, you had everybody, but certainly like political organizations in the White House, able to do direct publishing. And since then, what happened, I think, is there was a curatorial shift where the public became much more the kind of curators and amplifiers of particular news images, and not the media itself. So in some ways, news photography is more powerful, more salient, more dangerous, given the fact that it's kind of loose out there,
Right.
and especially with all of like now this polarization and all the money that's going into that polarization. News images can be appropriated, and I think AI and these kind of computer generated imagery starting to like kind of join in terms of that same power, impact, and dangerousness.
So you're suggesting, which I think is correct, if I understand this correctly, that the power of these images comes as much from their appropriation and circulation by others as it does from, say, the placement on a home web page or in a feed of a New York Times or a Washington Post or whatever.
Probably more so.
Right.
But yes, absolutely.
Yeah, interesting. So tell us, today you're going to show us an edit. We're not quite at 100 days of the Trump administration. As someone said earlier, it feels like 100 years, but we'll be there shortly. And that is going to bring a lot of sort of visual retrospectives, and you're going to do that. But you're going to show, you've put together an edit of images looking back that's a little bit different to what you're expecting from major news organizations. I mean, how do you think it's different, and why have you chosen this particular approach?
It's different because I think that the main concern I've had and have had for 20 years, but like now have it in a very heightened level is the uh, danger, problem, issue of normalization.
Right.
And as much as I think that the media and visual media are like are becoming more savvy and more aware, certainly because they're like, overtly under threat in terms of access and how much propaganda they're exposed to in what's going on. Um, I still think that even if they're like shifting and adjusting to some extent, I still think that the normalizing of what we're seeing is uh, is rampant, and I think that the way that media also tends to like take in a kind of illustrative or just objective approach uh, to politics and to governance, when what they're looking at is in fact right now insanity, also creates really a stronger need for what we do. So the edit is going to my edit is going to look a lot different. I'm very interested actually to see the edits that do come out, because there's going to be a flood of 100-day visual retrospectives. But I'm looking at three things in this edit, and normalizing or collusion. Then I'm looking at images that expose the abnormal, the propaganda, the denial through strong, honest visual reporting.
Yep.
And then I'm looking at the imagery out there that's providing commentary and critique on the abnormal. And that's sometimes subtle, that's sometimes overt. Uh, that's sometimes through news photographers, Instagram, can also be like the illustration for certain stories. But you'll see exaggeration, parody, irony, outright humor. This has become a major tool, both overtly and more subtly. And so I'll
Right.
be looking at some of those images too today.
Sure. Okay. Well, why don't you take us through the edit, speak to those images, we'll have a conversation, and to people in the audience, if you've got questions, put them into the comments. I'll bring them in either during the presentation or we'll come to them at the end.
Cool. Let's see. I'm advanced. Okay, I can advance these slides. So let's start here, and let's talk enabling and normalizing. And uh, this photograph was taken, this particular version, because so many pictures were taken in this at this photo op, and different kinds of pictures. But this one was taken by Doug Mills, and I think Doug Mills is an incredible photographer for the New York Times, but he also is a real favorite of Donald Trump. And I find that he's kind of sometimes he feels like kind of drunk the drink has drank has drank the Kool-Aid.
Yeah. The
And
Kool-Aid.
other times I think he's been, very tough, and especially some of his pictures from Guantanamo Bay. But
Right.
so anyway, this was a picture of President Trump visiting the Kennedy Center after he had basically disrupted the place, thrown out the board, thrown out the president, made himself the chairman. And so this was his first visit there for the first board meeting of all the people, mostly unqualified, that he installed.
Right.
And the picture, and especially this version of it first time when I first saw it, I thought, like, what came to mind was Eva Peron on that balcony. And this is like, I think a picture only a dictator could love. It really is very laudatory and shows him in command, and it's grand, and it's the thing is, like, when you start to look at all the different versions, then you start to see where news photographers are bringing a more editorial kind of vibe
Right.
to these, to the oligarchy. And so in this next version, this photo is taken by also Chip Somodevia at Getty. It's like a real, I'm a real fan. And there's so many images that kind of span the difference between the first one and this one, but
Right.
this photo is so interesting for like the distance. So it makes him more like a kind of artifact or like an object of fascination as opposed to like, the the king. But also like the function of the lights, it's so interesting, it's like Trump demands the spotlight. So what did Chip do is he panned out and he's got like whatever 12, 14 of them. You
Right.
don't know like where and he's competing with them.
Yeah.
And then what's in some way too, all this stuff is very subjective and symbolic, and that's what's so one thing that's really beautiful about photography. And I thought these look are like flying saucers, and it's like, are we in this alien
Yeah.
space right now with the planet at risk? Blah, blah, blah. So anyway, uh, so
And
the
then
contrast of these two photos, I think, is
yeah.
is really important.
The second one makes Trump look a little like a cardboard cutout in the middle of the picture. You know.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Interesting contrast.
So now we're going to go to something that's less, that's a lot more serious and scary. Uh, Again, we're talking about enabling and normalizing.
Yeah.
And I show this picture. I wasn't sure whether to show this picture because it's sometimes more powerful because everyone's got the picture in their head.
Right.
And this, I think, came from CNN, this version, but this was the photo op of Christy Nome down in El Salvador at the maximum security prison where, all of where America deported, I think almost like 150 Salvadorians, I'm sorry, Venezuelans that had been in the United States, call them war criminals. They're now like stuck there. And she did this amazing photo op, wearing the $50,000 Rolex, by the way, and kind of in this really casual dress. But like, uh, most of these images came from either the photographers, the pool photographers with her, or straight off of the video that that the Department of Homeland Security did. And
Right.
she said, "I have a clear message to criminal aliens. You need to leave now." They're running, commercials with it. Uh, so the chief critic for the New York Times, chief TV critic, calls it, not the Department of Homeland Security, but the Department of Homeland Publicity. And he's just referring to what's going on there because she's been doing pictures on horseback at the border and all kinds of, uh, he calls it a reality show that's both slick, showy, and often cruel. And, you know, so what I did is I've been looking at like broader edits. I always do this, and especially in contrast to this propaganda imagery where I think it makes the pool reporters basically enablers. Um, and sort of the same way that the assassination attempt on Trump yielded that one, fist pumping,
Yeah.
heroic, you know, image, and that was kind of a knee jerk response on the part of the media too, because that was like really was kind of the dramatic picture, but you know, it wasn't the only picture, and there's other pictures, give more context and show Trump stricken and show like the risk and gun violence and blah 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 blah. So let's look at two more, and this one was taken by Alex Brandon. He was in the pool for Getty. So my question is like, what's in a news photo? And this was published a bit, but but what's in a news photo, especially a scene of humiliation, reinforcing the propaganda driven by this deportation campaign. The one, by the way, where a judge ordered them to turn the plane back and they disregarded the order. So one is the fact that many um, Venezuelan migrants were shipped to this terrorist CCOT mega prison based on tattoos that turned out to be falsely identified as gang affiliated. Uh, and then, like some of them that looked like the crowns that were associated with this gang, turned out to be, logos from, from Real Madrid,
Yeah.
the soccer team.
Football club.
But,
Yeah.
but even worse, consider the officer standing next to the prisoner who's posing with that multi-page document. So, I mean, you look at that and, you can imagine that, they've got all this backup and research and they know who each person is. But what's so interesting is like last week, 60 Minutes, did some research and uncovered the fact that 75% of the alleged criminals sent to CCOT by DHS have no criminal record.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this thing's unraveling, but you can see pictures like this and the trappings of it reinforce that they do have the documentation, or they aren't, they all have those insignias. It's so that's one reason why we exist, and we all need to be, better visual consumers. So, and then I want to go to what I think is a much scarier image. And in contrast to the fact that the last shot you saw was uh, was taken by an American reporter as part of the pool. This one was released by the El Salvador presidency's office as a handout. And in some respects, because of this kind of cruelty and kind of blunt, you know, and loose adherence to laws and to human rights, I think a picture like this is actually like quite revealing. Uh, and at first, you do see this kind of, it emphasizes the propaganda impact, that there's a coterie of people that are like gawking at these guys. And then you see the two cameras, the one on the far left, the handheld, and then the one near right. So this is clearly like screams, setup or photo op. But then there's another element in this picture that's really terrifying and really does bear further research, whether it's on my part or someone else's part, about, because if you look at on the left side of that picture, there's a officer who's holding a gun,
Mm-hmm.
who's holding a rifle, and he's got his finger on the trigger, and he's looking very intently at this prisoner. So then the question is, okay, these guys are locked up in this supermax prison. It doesn't seem like they would go anywhere. They've just been strip searched or whatever. It's like, at the same time, like, are these guys being like forced into a photo op at gunpoint? And then the question is, when you go back to like, these other images, is the same thing happening here?
Yeah.
I mean, effectively, that's the situation. But to see it, with the guy with his finger on the trigger, that's really scary. And what's our responsibility as, in terms of the media, in terms of consumers, to really, be exposed to that kind of context.
I think the answer to your question is, are they being forced? The answer is yes, because I read also that in fact these individuals behind the bars were not the people that had been deported, but were regular El Salvadorian prisoners, that the Venezuelans were elsewhere in the facility. And I saw a photo. You can see some in this one here. You can see people. There's like a set of levels behind the bars, and the people at the
Yes.
top have masks and shirts on.
Yes.
People at the bottom have shirts off. And I saw a photo of Noam and her entourage walking in where everyone had shirts on. And therefore, it seems like they were requested inverted commas, to take their shirts off to show tattoos and stand almost to attention.
Yeah. In this picture too, you see the guy with the shirt in his hand, and you see the mask actually on the ground. I guess I got to put him back on, but like at their
Yes.
feet.
Yes.
So Yeah,
So
and
the,
that
so
actually,
the notion of yeah. So Christopher in the audience is saying the same thing. That NPR reported they were told to take shirts off to show tattoos.
uh-huh,
Um, so the extent of the photo opportunity is even greater than than just the fact they're prisoners and so on, which is pretty extraordinary and pretty disgusting. It raises really, I
absolutely.
mean, there's a big question. You've referenced it in terms of pool reporters who are in a difficult situation because they have to record things, but then whatever their intentions, maybe those images become enabling images and so on. And that this one, for example, was a handout from the president's office in El Salvador and so on. Normally,
Right.
news agencies, when they get handouts, mark the images as being handouts from government agencies. So, for example, say a Reuters, who doesn't have photographers in North Korea, will sometimes distribute things from the North Korean news agency, but mark it as here's a handout from the North Korean news agency. Have you ever seen that on these images? Are we getting those acknowledgments that either they're a handout from Homeland Security or the El Salvadorian president's office?
I have to say that in this case, the different versions that I saw published mostly had a very formal caption that had that clearly identified it as a handout. But
Okay.
that's not to say that there aren't a lot of images that are being published.
Yeah.
A lot of them say like being U.S. military images that have a real propaganda or like a sensationalized, very high quality images, engaging images that are barely identified or not identified.
Yeah.
So, but these seem to have been.
Yeah.
But yeah, but your points are great. Who are the 128? You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
I mean,
And Jurgen's also making the point that these ones resonate with photographs from actually from Auschwitz. When you see some of
uh,
Buchenwald, and when you see the prisoners lined up behind
oh
bars
god.
posing in certain ways, it's pretty extraordinary some of the resonances to these pictures.
And what's interesting about like the points you're making and point Jurgen made is that the images are coming so fast and so furiously. This whole like flooded zone, inundation, and which I think is highly by design, especially
Yeah.
with just the implementation of the Project 2025 agenda. But yeah, it's like that. This is the problem with images too, is that we process all of this stuff, through our third eye. Uh, there's all these associations that get triggered. This is done by design, especially advertising imagery.
Mhm.
So in the in this moment that we're in, I mean, I didn't even think about that in terms of the analogy to the Auschwitz photo, but it's like my body does. I think my
Yeah.
brain does,
Yeah.
and that's what's really dangerous.
Yeah.
Um, so go on.
Yep.
Uh, Again, in this case, I'm not showing you the image that is the one that we all have mostly like stored in our brains. That photo, though, if you compare it to this one, which really wasn't published widely at all, um, uh, shows Musk alone. And what you see in the more popular image is Musk doing the gesture, the Roman
Mhm.
salute, um, against two empty tiers of a blue viewing stand, printed with these rows of white stars. So
Mm.
uh, the fact that it's done in isolation, allows you to just see this as a one-off, or that he had this, audacious moment. But
Mm.
this photo, I think, is incredible, where it shows it from the side, and photos taken by Justin Sullivan for Getty. And here it speaks of the tacit and also the overt support of the racist foundations of the MAGA movement.
Mhm.
So I just, and the difference between seeing one versus this, again, all these things have impact, even if it's like more subconscious, or unconscious.
Yeah.
um yeah,
The seeming pleasure in this moment is from the audience is striking.
absolutely, and it's hard to know. I mean, it, also this is some of the trickiness, but also the magic of photography, because he's probably, and I'd have to go back and look at the video, but there obviously you'd think like the applause and is from like something that's more culminatory for what he's been saying up to that point, and they may not have even registered
Hmm.
or processing that, but this capturing the still moment for eternity, and the underlying veracity and truth
Hmm.
of the connection and the response is what makes this photo so powerful
Yeah.
and legitimate.
Yeah.
uh this was our marketing frame, and I just, the Democrats, there's a narrative that's right now that's so dominated by the administration and was so actually dominant during the campaign, that and these themes also get picked up by the media and broadcast by the media and quoted and highlighted, and or elevated. And if you talk about the narrative about the around the State of the Union, they're like the Democrats um, push back. Representative Green with the cane and the little signs, with the paddles. They were so castigated. It was like, this isn't organized, this isn't cheap. That just jumps right on to Democrats in disarray, which they are. But then you don't even look at like kind of the individual moves. And this picture of Representative Melanie Stanbury, she's a Democrat from New Mexico, she positioned herself right at the entrance, when Trump entered. And I think this is brilliant. But I think you have to extrude it from the narrative and from some of the other images that maybe don't hit home. But you want to talk about photo bombing, you want to talk about trolling, you want to talk about uh, an asterisk to like what's going on. You want to talk about like a split screen effect. I
Hmm.
mean, this picture by Win McNamee and her action, by the way, like a congressperson, Republican congressperson or senator, grabbed this out of her hands and threw it immediately. And there's photos of that too, but which is kind of pretty hostile. But
Yeah.
I think this is just very powerful of like, subtext, bottom line, caution, warning, emergency. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah.
Uh, I love this photograph, and it's just, I mean, it's one of those photographs that's like, probably will be in a lot of those media, traditional media retrospectives. But so the context is really important, though. Like, it's Susie Wiles, who's the chief of staff and head strategist um, for Trump. She kept Trump in the campaign in check. It was kind of the opposite, of like, this is like herding cats to the nth. And she's a master, and she stays very behind the scenes as opposed to like the rest of the Trump, you know, the clown show, and she remains poker face. But this is really about what it's like to manage such a loose cannon and how completely impulsive this guy is. The photo was taken during that wild February 2025 press conference with Benjamin Netanyahu, where Trump just casually drops this bombshell idea about that America is going to take over Gaza, kick out all the Palestinians, and build this luxury, like
Hmm.
beachfront, Mediterranean style resort. And so this is the moment. This was that moment. And for Susie Wiles to like have an expression like this and be caught this off guard, and this publicly off
Hmm.
guard, which she would, never, ever, ever, ever happen, a million to one. Well, this guy just kind of does what he wants. He's hyper impulsive, completely audacious. And she's like, WTF? I mean, so it's a lot about the depth of his insanity and impulsivity,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
and that she so to elicit this kind of response.
yeah. As Kenneth says, that image, it's absolutely awesome. It says a lot. I mean, it looks like your mother chast, chastising you when she doesn't want to say anything, just gives you the evil eye. Yeah.
Exactly. Perfect. uh I love this picture. I can't believe we actually found a published version of it. You can find a lot of pictures on Getty that they throw up there for sale, and someone
Hmm.
somewhere published it. But you know, this background. This is taken by Andrew Harnick for Getty. It's like it shows uh, Pete Hegseth arriving for a meeting with Senator Ted Budd on Capitol Hill as he's doing the rounds, with all the senators before, the formal nomination hearings. This is absolutely standard when you nominate someone who's got, who's even, like somewhat qualified, not like Hegseth with the alcoholism and the complete lack of qualifications, and the fact that he couldn't manage these like tiny nonprofit veterans organizations when he was,
Hmm.
way back when. And you know, the senators, especially the Republican senators, you always open your office and do the photo shoot, and you're sitting on the couch and
Hmm.
and schmoozing and doing all that. Well, there was a lot of senators Republican senators, Marsha Blackburn and some of the others. I think maybe Joni Ernst was one. Yeah, Joni Ernst. They would not allow themselves to be photographed with this guy. I mean, talk about a tell. And so here, what was amazing is I said, I think I wrote something about this where I said that Senator Budd ended up splitting the difference. So they like kept the door open a crack, and you got this with
Yeah.
Hegseth and his wife. I mean, come on, this is like really, really an indictment. It's unbelievable.
So they didn't want to be seen with him, but they still voted to confirm him.
Down the line,
Yeah.
down the line, down the
Yeah.
line. Uh,
There's
there's
nothing
also, yeah.
nothing quite so powerful as partisanship, right?
And well, and also the leverage that Trump has, where these people are, like I'll primary you if you don't vote for, don't, every last little thing that I demand. Maybe
Yeah.
you're seeing some grumbling and maybe a few cracks, emerging right now, but it's still that's the case. It's unbelievable. You're talking about, you know, where democracy, in we're certainly in a constitutional crisis.
Yeah.
That's for sure. We can stop like fudging around about that.
Yeah.
Um, so if you follow, let's see, I got one picture out of order. Oh, I lost the pictures. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Um, this picture, if you follow Chatting the Pictures, we do these videos called Chatting the Pictures. They're basically 3-minute deep dives on a particular picture, and then we'll show accompanying images to give you more context on it. And if you look in the background of this shot with Trump meeting in the Oval Office with Prime Minister Modi of India, you'll see that on the back wall, and that's behind Susie Wiles, who's now more typically pictured.
Yeah.
uh, you see Donald Trump's mugshot from that was published on the cover of the New York Post, hanging in a gold frame in this very tight passageway outside the Oval Office, and it goes to that particular door and entrance goes to something called the Outer Oval, which is just used for the president's secretary sits out there, and it's just used by White House staff, members of Congress, and sometimes some friends. So in a cramped space, Pete Souza, like who I'm friendly with, he like kind of jumped out of his skin when he saw that. He said that space is too small to put up a picture, but not when it has this kind of effect. And also when all your in-house people have to walk past it, and the mugshot, with all the threat and bluster is like right in your face because you don't have any space otherwise to to avoid it. So, the gilded framing of the mugshot allows it to blend seamlessly with the historical presidential portraits. And as my colleague Kara Finnegan said, it elevates a booking photo to the status of presidential portraiture, the way it, is there with the paintings. And then, transforms a criminal indictment into a badge of honor. And then it also, creates, as I was saying, in terms of the passageway, it creates this intimidating checkpoint. So, there's like a visual warning right there at the entrance of the Oval Office that you're entering a space unbound by any norms or limits. And, no one knows that better than, President Zelensky.
Yeah.
So, it's pretty incredible.
As Kenneth points out, if you go and see if you have an image of the official portrait, the one that gets hung in embassies and around the world, it looks very much like the mugshot. It has the same sort of head angle pose and so on to it.
And they were very open about that, like that was the point.
Right.
So, yeah, that's another thing, is you don't have that level of discretion. Trump is like, tells you what he's going to do,
Yeah.
then he does what he's going to do, and and then we're like, oh my God, he did that. It's like, just really quickly too, this also shows like the kind of kitsch and clutter that is now characteristic of the White House. Underneath those books, he has this embossed emblem of the presidency. I mean, I think it's for his benefit. And then all of those trophies that are on the mantelpiece, it's like, what happened to to Obama's apples, or like, I mean, it and there's other shots in this, and like in some of the other rooms that are like incredible, just in terms of like, all of the mirroring, and literally, like, there's on those doors, by the way, that close, that one and the more main door, when they're closed, what's hanging on the back of them are these gold embossed mirrors. Like, again, WTF, right? I think David Barreto was like, just commented about
he said the gold everywhere.
Gold everywhere.
Yeah,
it's incredible. I think this photo is really, really important. It was taken by Kim Raff for the New York Times. Why have we heard a lot about angry town halls with elected representatives, but seen fewer pictures? And I think one reason is, again, the kind of narrative barrage from the GOP, the White House, MAGA, that, well, you can't trust these pictures of people screaming at elected representatives, mostly Republicans. And those are the ones that even are choosing to do town halls, because those are Democrats, or they're actually people hired by the Democrats, or Democratic disruptors. I don't think that's true, and I've looked at a lot of them, and I've collected a lot of them. And then what's wrong with Democrats? Their constituents, being outraged. So, like, the narrative kind of splits off, like, half the population, that the 49% point whatever that voted against Trump. But so why is this photograph so important? This is one of the first pictures I saw published from the whole cycle of town halls. And, well, clearly you can tell that it's because, like, most of these people, unless they're Democratic Confederates that are in dress up, they're wearing MAGA hats. So, I mean, and the backstory on this particular event was that it was held in Evanston, Wyoming in March, by Representative Harriet Hageman, who's second-term Congresswoman from Wyoming. And if you look it up, she won her district by 75% of the vote.
Wow.
So, I mean, you'd be hard-pressed to find Democrats in the district anyway. let alone like, so this is proof. The proof is in the pudding, I guess. And so again, in terms of the backstory, these people were so angry about Doge and about all these cuts and it was Musk that brought a lot of these people out, as well as like concern about Social Security and tariffs. And so, but those are some steely faced looking people there. They're not screaming, but they don't look happy at all.
Not at all. Not at all.
Moving more, just a couple of images that we're talking, besides Chip's photo from the Kennedy Center, that we're talking about pictures that are providing visual commentary and critique on the abnormal. And I mentioned through exaggeration, parody, irony, humor, and in this next case, I would also say like kind of some real high aesthetics. This was taken by Olga Fedorova. She's a freelance photographer in freelance photojournalist in DC, or I think in New York, and she documented these arrests outside a Tesla dealership in I think in New York City, and this has become there's almost like a mini movement itself. It's kind of protesting outside of Tesla dealerships. But I think this image is really great for a lot of reasons. The way it critiques the Trump era oligarchy and the growing resistance to Musk's influence, the Doge cuts that are decimating these federal agencies. And, there's such a polished advertising like aesthetic to this photograph. And I think that's amazing. It's just like underscores Trump's blatant corporate cronyism and the manipulation of major executives to submit to him. And if you like really zoom in on this picture, you'll see that this guy who's being accosted by these two, I think they're probably NYPD officers, his face is almost aligned, not just with like all the silvery, this kind of black silver, aesthetic of these dealerships, but right there, he's almost like got his face in an ad, and it says "plug in, charge, and go." I mean, like, right? That's kind of like plug in, charge, and go is what they're doing, and what these people are trying to, are doing also in response. It's just this biting irony, contrasting Tesla's promise of progress and freedom from like the reality of corporate greed and the abuse of democracy. It's great.
Yeah.
And then the officer's hat is kind of cool too. Talk about also, this collapse of traditional authority, and all like, how these people are being delegated into this like authoritarian system. So there's the hat lying like also, in between as almost a display object.
Like the collapse of law and order,
Collapse of law and order, or collapse into the, into the oligarchy. Yeah.
I think the expression, just to go back to that, the expression on that protester's face is extraordinary too, because it's not one of pain or grimace or violence or whatever. It has a contempt almost, that expression,
It's reaching. It's like, it's it's enterprising.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. Good observation. This I find is an amazing photograph. You can only look at so many protest pictures, and there again, the narrative is like, protests don't do anything, and it's like, so in a way, you start to get, to the extent people are already inert in certain respects, then you start to get the defamation of the act, even though there was tens of thousands of people across the country that did participate in that day of action. So and I think protest is growing, and it's definitely going to be a factor and a critical outlet. But this picture was taken by Alex Kent. He's also a freelance photojournalist in DC and in New York, and it shows alumni of Columbia's School of Public Affairs ripping up their diplomas in protest of the university's handling of the Khalil detainment by ICE,
Right.
and then all the other kind of restrictions and caving that's taking place on that campus from access, ICE access and carting other people away, and the taking away like the funding for research and on down the line. But you know, photojournalists, very good photojournalists, you know, they're they're known for, although they don't necessarily get all the recognition, for incredible creativity.
Hmm.
And these men and women, they know, when they're dealing with some kind of situation where it's been photographed so many different times the same similar ways. And this is just so beautiful, just like it shows, kind of an active violence in frustration. It's such an interesting parallel. Um, the emptiness in between the pieces of paper, how much the piece of paper is forsaken, which is, to earn something like that is extraordinary. It involves an extraordinary commitment. So, um, it's also something you could probably talk about all day too, because it's got so many associations to it.
A fractured country, a split country, a country torn apart. The resonances are multiple in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure we'll go to Q&A pretty soon. I mean, we can go back and I'm sure people have plenty to say about these different images. One more in terms of commentary, oh, there's the other picture. That was out of order. Let me go back. So I love this picture too, because you hardly see any of these. We hear and hear and hear about these people got laid off, and we hear it in terms of numbers, or maybe you see a profile of a person, but you don't really see the act of it. Just like that photograph of the two senators that were barred from entering, I don't remember which agency it was, early on. But this photograph, you see HHS employee Julie Siegel standing outside the Switzer Memorial Building, and she's showing up for work. She's denied access, and her badge is confiscated. Uh, and right after it was reported, maybe it was reported overnight, that the Trump administration had fired staff at the CDC and at the FDA. And it's so interesting how, like, the look on her face, kind of innocent, naive,
Mhm.
like some just surprised in the truest sense of surprise. Then you've got the two security officers, and they're looking a little like, caught red-handed or something, and especially the guy on the right, because he's raising his hand, and I don't know if he wants to cover the lens, but when you see this, that's not good.
Mhm.
So uh, this was Kevin Lamarck from Reuters caught this, and it really speaks volumes.
Mhm. Absolutely.
And then, so I'll jump. I think we have time for, yeah, this is my last one. I love Dina Latovsky's work, and she's
Mhm.
been on Substack for quite some time. She writes very well. She provides fantastic context and talks a lot about the reality of being a photojournalist, and the compromises, and the or perceived compromises. She's really great, and her pictures are just so outstanding and forthright. So this was taken at Charlie Kirk's Turning Point inauguration ball. She took the an amazing series to the New York Times Magazine, um, and oh my God, to find a picture that so starkly symbolizes the perceived aggression, true aggression and threat associated with the Trump administration. And that muzzled dog, that's a scary dog, and it's there with the security people. I think she just went through a metal detector to get in. And Charlie Kirk, he's one of these really far right advocates, overtly racist, really white supremacist. And symbolically, I mean, I can't help thinking the woman's holding the dog or holding a leash, which she's not.
Yeah,
She's holding a phone in her, in I think her either part of her dress or a bag.
yeah,
Um, but this is the MAGA faithful, reveling, behind this wall of fear and menace and intimidation and danger. And it's all there, but it's also it's a picture from a party.
yeah,
So and maybe party is a double entendre actually,
yeah.
but there's the party, anyway. So
I think that was
my
also interesting for the blackness in it. I mean, a little like the torn diploma, the torn degree,
uh
that half this one is black.
a- absolutely. Absolutely. So, I mean, my intention there is again, my intention was, and you're not going to find it in the media, lineups that you're going to see very soon. And I'm sure there'll be challenging images there too,
Yeah,
but or concerning images. But you know, normalizing, exposing the abnormal and the propaganda and the denial through strong, images, brave images, and then all of the commentary and critique that are maybe like subconscious or implied, but have are just as are bolder and have
yeah,
even more to say.
yeah. That's that's really great, Michael. Thank you. To folks in the audience, if you've got questions, drop them into the chat. We'll bring them in. We have time for Q&A. And if you want to reference particular images, we can bring those back up on the screen too. Um, I mean, I think one of the things that strikes me looking at these images too, and what I like about your process is that you force us to look at these images. That is, they often go by very quickly. I'm not one of those people who believes we're flooded. The only people who are flooded are photo editors at media organizations who have streams
They're
of
flooded.
documents. Um, most people don't actually consume a lot of news imagery because they don't consume a lot of news. So they don't get the imagery that comes with it. You have to choose to have, Instagram feed or whatever. But nonetheless, by giving us a series and making us stop and look at whatever, you really see how what on the surface, like the woman, you know, being barred from work at HHS, on the surface, if I saw that, I would pass that by too quickly, and I would go, oh yeah, news image, right, pretty illustrative. But to probe deeper, you see that every one of these images has multiple layers, multiple meanings, can be interpreted in particular ways. Um, let's go. I mean, I think this is a fair question from Mike Davis, but I also think it's outside the purpose of your edit. He says you're surprised you didn't mention the Trump assassination attempt. I mean, you're talking about images from the first 100 days and so on of the actual administration. So, you know, different phrases. But is there something that you would want to say about the different photos of that assassination attempt from July last year?
Yeah, I think Mike's question and request is relevant. Like formally, I was only looking at pictures that from like minute one of the after the inauguration, and but yeah, as I mentioned on a couple of these photographs, and tried to show in the juxtaposition of the Kennedy Center photos, is that or the that first photo of Christy Nome in El Salvador, that certain photographs just become darlings of the media, and then are used to have maximum propaganda value. And Kara Finnegan, my colleague again, talked about, and she told me that morning actually, like right after she saw the photograph of him on stage with the that and the bloody ear, and and the composition of it is amazing, that he stage managed that photograph. And typically you think about that as like someone did that in advance, but he's that instinctive and has that much genius in terms of how people consume, whether they're visual metaphors or language. Or so, yeah, I mean, what Mike reminds me of too is how the World Press Photo just
Yes.
made one of the other photographs, awarded one of the other photographs and ignored the fight
Yeah.
image. And it's really important because those other images show a president, a presidential candidate, shot, stricken,
Yeah.
uh, and Trump in a very vulnerable and diminished state, which he avoids at all costs. Uh, and there's other pictures that I did one post about this and showed a whole array of images, people crying in the crowd before they started, you know, USA, USA. So yeah, I tried to, carry through that spirit of, a more robust edit,
Right.
and I'm glad that, and Mike is, bringing more attention to it.
Yeah. So I think this is a really interesting observation from Dan as a photojournalist, saying they're a bit enslaved to our own visual sophistication, looking for the moment, framing compositions, high level of craft, etc. I mean, I've got a couple of other comments like this. I mean, is this part of a paradox or a double bind in photojournalism that the craft and the visual sophistication can lead to a particular type of imagery that doesn't give us a hint of what's outside the frame? Is that are photojournalists trapped like that? I mean, things to speculate on.
I mean, it's a great comment, Dan's comment. I refer to something when I'm looking at pictures and trying to decide, what to highlight uh, in terms of this ratio. And what I mean by that is that I'm always wondering. I will, in a kind of preliminary consideration, I'll like ask myself: is the aesthetics, um, is the attractiveness, is the like a kind of the candy of the photo stronger, or does it overshadow the narrative impact and the story? And the first 10 years I was doing this, I found so many pictures that were, that kind of checked that box, and I wasn't going to talk about because the beauty of it, or the striking quality in some way, um, was overshadowing. I think that news photos did some kind of a shift about 10 years ago, where I think you started seeing the narrative, the start to like meet the challenge of the aesthetics.
Hmm.
And I think you saw this where a lot of these photos are doing a lot more storytelling, where before that and before the internet and all of that, that they were just a lot more straight illustrative.
Hmm.
So I think that this is still a concern, but I think it's a very strong concern for a photographer. I think Dan's a photographer.
Yes.
Not, and yes, 'cause I've seen some of his work in bylines, but um, I think it's more of a concern for the photographer, because I just find that the aesthetics, like they're reinforcing each other. And it is stunning how, like, like this image, as you pointed out, David, it's just, it's so visceral. It really grabs you. So yeah, I'm less concerned about that,
Right.
but it's still a criterion.
Right. I think this follows on from Dan's point, and that sense of being a bit enslaved to visual sophistication potentially. Mike's asking, given the performative nature of the administration, do we have to change the criteria by which we judge, go beyond peak moment considerations? And I take the peak moment considerations to link directly to Dan's point about maybe being enslaved to visual sophistication and getting that moment. Is this where the tension is?
I'm just going to go back to this for a second. When we say judge photos, the first thing I thought was judging photos in a you know in a contest, and this is where a lot of photos, and the photo industry, or the photo community, there's a lot of focus on that. Not to judge that at all, um, but when you talk about judgment more in like the broader scope, which is I think what Mike's asking, you know, journalism, and photojournalism, it's part of a business. This is the media industry. So, I think that it's probably why I'm spending more time on Instagram these days, and because I'm basically looking at photographers' outtakes, where you might see the photo or two that were published, but they're going to show six or seven more, or three or four more, and they're judging and using criteria that does involve, like, the meaning or the narrative, like a shot like this, where you might, like you were saying, click past this in a second, or never see a picture like this, in a story. Those pictures are on in a lot of those Instagram
Mhm.
um, uh, features now. So I'd say I would agree with Mike flat out. I would say yes, that we should go past like the peak moment. But fact of the matter is, whether it's to sell newspapers or whatever, like to attract eyeballs, or that we live in a culture that puts so much premium on drama, and the aesthetics only get higher. I think that we want to like have a broader perspective
Mhm.
and try and incorporate both.
Mhm.
And I think that's a major reason why and reading the pictures exists, and we do what we do.
Mhm.
But we're never going to get away from, the power and the drama, because it serves interests, commercial and political interests. And between those two factors, which are only getting stronger in this, you know, in this corporate, corporatized, the commodified democracy, they're always going to get uh, prioritized, I think, or privileged.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I think what you've demonstrated in the reading of these images is that actually, regardless of what the intention of the photographer was, and again, I would connect back to Dan's interesting comments on that. Um, every image has the seeds of going beyond the peak moment consideration within it to through those layers. Some more than others, perhaps. But so I think I would say we don't have to change the criteria. I think that, looking at those layers, looking at those interpretations and so on, is not requiring different kinds of criteria, except I guess if you were a photo editor at a major news organization, you might think a bit more consciously about these things. I mean, your three things about normalization, exposing the abnormal, and then commentary on the abnormal, maybe that needs to be a more overt consideration to deal with the performative nature of the administration. But I wouldn't see that as different criteria. I would just see that as asking questions about the layers and so on. But different people in different situations in the process and the industry are going to make different decisions. But I think that whatever is published, we're capable of reading it through those layers and different interpretations to see some pretty complex things. I mean, photographers have often shown kind of the backstory sometimes. Was it Alex Soth? I think photos of the invasion of Grenada, or one of the many US invasions, where he was lying in front of the Marines that were coming into the country, which exposed the fact that they weren't actually in a firing line, or whatever. These sorts of things. One's images where Trump was serving McDonald's in Pennsylvania during the campaign. You can take the frame just of him at the window, but if you step back, a local newspaper had the entire media crowd, in the driveway where there were no cars, and you had to be cleared to get into the McDonald's anyway, and stuff like that to do that. So maybe the performative nature, requires more imagery like that, but we've had some of that throughout the decades. Maybe it's just a matter of having more of that.
And it does depend on whether you're talking about, say, like the media industry and the demand and requirements of editors and the marketplace, as opposed to, say, um, the the public, because I think the public, with all its material, at hand, has become incredibly savvy at finding that shot, and doing the forensics and calling out and the narrative. And you know I I was on top of that McDonald's photo, uh, right away, and was
Right.
doing, delving into pictures. But there's nothing like social media now, where you know I think it was like a reader who just found, just pulled one of these frames that showed them, not just ushering the cars one at a time, but then figured out that they had Confederates, or they had hand selected the people that were in those cars.
Hmm.
And then you looked at that picture of the woman, like, just gushing over Trump, and how they had actually, like, really decided, demographically, who was in those four cars that were going to be in most. This was the public doing this. So, and
Hmm.
we can advocate for some of these, more populist and more democratic, like Mike was saying. It's kind of more, yeah, the democratization of this PR.
Yeah.
And but you know academics talk about it a lot, and people that are media critics talk about it a lot, but the people are doing it. And that's why I think that we try and really stay in those populist spaces too, because we're, kind of, part of that bubbling up.
Yeah. So, two questions and comments to finish. This is a good and detailed one from Christopher, pointing out that really news photographers, particularly White House photographers, realize the performative nature, but they're in this context of working so fast, having to deliver these things. They have to picture what is in front of them, be fair, aesthetic. Can we ignore intention and fairness?
Hey, David, maybe you can drill down more into the specifics of it. What I think what this says to me, or what this brings up, and I think it's really important to say, because your audience does comprise a lot of professionals,
Yeah.
and I have such respect. I mean, I actually did a day, with the pool, on Capitol Hill, uh, and with the White House, the photo gallery. And I have nothing but respect for, the demands and the constraints of, those jobs. And if the point here is, you know being more in tune, and being more, and really speaking more to, you know the constraints, and how hard these, working photojournalists, you know and how much effort they put into, like, really capturing the broader bandwidth. I I I think it's incredible what we see, and how much they do capture, and how much, for example, how much innuendo is there on the margins. And it's not to, like, disparage, but it's to, like, try and capture breadth. And I I think it's quite incredible, actually. I mean, I'm not kind of a muckraker and kind of talk from that perspective a lot, but you know, these photos, like you said, sometimes it just means, like, giving more time,
Yeah.
to see how much is there.
Yeah.
It's an incredible amount there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's any in offering a critique and reading of imagery this way. There is no slight, uh, indirect or direct, towards those who are making imagery in those extremely difficult circumstances. What I would say is that, of course, that's one element, because then, of course, as Christopher says, they make hundreds or thousands, send 40 or 50 to the desks. Some then get selected by the desks, some get distributed, some get picked up, some get published. In other words, there's a whole series of decision points and processes along the way which are interesting to look at. And not all, if there is criticism in the negative sense, as opposed to criticism in terms of just analysis, it doesn't fall on the shoulders of the photographer. It falls on that process of image production and circulation. I think that's a very important thing to emphasize. So when I was talking about whatever the intention, to me, and I think you're the same, is that what you're interested in is the effect of imagery. And that can be different from the intention of the image maker or the editor or the gatekeeper, as Christopher says, along the way, or the media. You're looking at the effect and the layers and the possibility of reading those things. None of that, casts aspersions on the people who are making the photographs in the first place to start with, because they do have to record, what is in front of them in particular ways. I mean, there's a larger question there about whether or not access to photo ops, is something that might want to be questioned or thought about in different ways. But that's a different debate for another day. But that's especially the case, as Mike says, given the performative nature of this current administration. I wanted to conclude with this comment and question from Gwen, picking up Sontag about images that mobilize a link to a given historical situation. What's your take on that? And do you think the images that you've shown or other similar ones will stand the test of time?
Yeah, I think that's a consideration also. And it's funny, in a real practical sense, when we do these chatting the pictures, the news cycle is moving so incredibly quickly, and it has for quite a while, but just like faster and faster, especially where Trump takes advantage of that. We're starting. I'm really very oriented to pictures that I would consider more evergreen, and that's a direct. And I think that's also about the historicity of images, as much as it's something that's going to matter in 6 weeks or a month. And I'm also really conscious about how much photos have a meaning at a particular point in time. So that picture, for example, of the woman losing her credentials in front of the government office, that picture may be very, really not have much to say, in 6 months from now or a year from now. But, so it's very salient now. So I'm trying to strike the balance between something that's, going to really be retrospective, current, very immediately significant, and then also prospective. So a lot of these images are not going to stand the test of time.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, putting in this kind of time and care really means trying to find the pictures that either will
Mm-hmm.
or should.
Yeah. Well, Michael, that brings us to the end of our time, and I'm really grateful for the edit you put together and the discussion. So I'm very pleased for the questions from the audience. Thank you to those people who remained and asked those questions. I think the discussion has been fantastic. I mean, a lot of people talk about visual literacy, and I think it's a mistaken concept in a lot of ways, as though you have to teach someone. I've always thought about everyone is capable from a very young age of reading images in particular ways, but what we don't have is the opportunity and the time to read them. And I think that's what you do with reading the pictures, is actually commit your own time and opportunity to do that. And then in an event like this, we've also made time for everyone. And as I said earlier, to stop, think, pause, examine. That's not something that happens very often. So thank you very much for that. I think this is, to me, how visual literacy operates, giving all us readers the time to look at those pictures and think about those sorts of things. So it's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you, David. And for people that be able to engage more that way, I would encourage you to subscribe to Reading the Pictures, and and make it more of a conversation. But it's always great talking to you,
Yeah,
and you have a great audience. So it's an absolute pleasure to be here.
great. Thank you very much, everybody.